It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Your emails as well at randykabc@gmail.com and search for the KABC News Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. You know, sometimes I think about my nearly 20-year radio career and how there's been one story that I've been perpetually talking about or been on shows that I've been talking about since 2009. And that, of course, is California's high-speed rail, something that was talked about in the 70s and 80s. Plans started getting developed in the early 90s. In the 2000s, they decided to put it on the ballot. In 2008, voters said, yes, we want high-speed rail. We want something that goes from Los Angeles all the way to San Francisco, then eventually from San Diego to Sacramento. What a beautiful thing. And then a whole bunch of money got spent and no train. You know that. What you might not know is yesterday at a transportation hearing in the state assembly, the California Legislative Analyst's Office says if we don't get another $7 billion for the high-speed rail in the next few months, the whole project could stop. No Merced and Wasco route for you. And of course, there are a lot of people shaking their heads, wondering why are we still beating our heads against the wall with this thing? Let's hear what Ashley Zavala had to say on KCRA 3.
Well, for the first time since the Trump administration launched an investigation into the use of federal funds on the high-speed rail project, Governor Gavin Newsom is now speaking at length about it for the first time.
On his podcast. Don't you worry, I listened to the whole damn thing.
Also, lawmakers got a brief update on where that project stands right now.
As I say, we did the railhead. We're starting to lay track. This thing's starting to get very, very real.
No, it's not. They've been saying any minute now for the past 15 years. It took 12 years to do the permitting. That is not an accomplishment.
Governor Gavin Newsom defending California's high-speed rail project on his latest podcast episode released Wednesday morning. This
podcast is only getting him in trouble.
The project, originally pitched to voters in 2008 as a bullet train between LA to San Francisco, is significantly short on funds and nowhere near finished. The state has so far spent about $14 billion and needs more than double that just to finish the first line between Merced and Bakersfield. The Trump administration is now reviewing the use of $4 billion in federal funds so far. Finishing the full route between the Bay Area and Southern California needs at least $100 billion.
And there's no funding source for that. Not from the state, not from the feds. They don't even have the money to complete the track that they say they're going to complete. And there is no plan or timeline for San Francisco to L.A. So we're building Central Valley to Central Valley, and the ridership for that is going to be what?
Most of that money has yet to materialize.
I mean, at the end of the day, we've got these constraints that are well established already, these pre-existing constraints. There's not a high-speed rail in the system that's not enjoying some popularity and success. Most, at least, are wildly popular.
Well, if they go from somewhere to somewhere, we built a train from nowhere to nowhere. And you know what? If you lived in the Central Valley and we built a train that got you to the Silicon Valley area or got you to Southern California, that would make sense. And that could be a game changer for some people. But that's not what we're building. And later on today, I'm going to tell you exactly why. Because this is something I didn't know that I learned on Gavin Newsom's stupid podcast, and it's fascinating.
It's an experience no one's had in the United States of America. At least we're out there daring.
But some Democratic lawmakers during a hearing on the project Wednesday had different thoughts.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Never heard that one before. It's the cliche Olympics every day in Sacramento.
The high-speed rail had not yet submitted its annual report, which irked Assembly members Wednesday. The state's Legislative Analyst's Office told lawmakers the project needs $7 billion by next June in order to move forward.
And I don't know where we're going to get that money because there's a whole lot of things that are suddenly running to Sacramento saying that we're broke, we need a bailout. High-speed rail, Karen Bass in the city of Los Angeles. You've got the Medi-Cal fund, which is $7 billion over budget. where exactly are we going to come up with $7 billion? Are we going to pass another bond for this thing?
We are diligently working on getting that additional information with respect to scope, schedule, ridership.
We have no plan. We have a good likelihood that it's going to get worse, and we have a short time to try to solve the problem, right? That's not a good place for government to put itself into.
No, it isn't. This thing is moving at a snail's pace, and there is little progress to be shown.
I was in middle school when...
Unless, you count progress as, we've created so many jobs. But what did they do?
I was in middle school when this happened.
Republican Assemblymember Alexandra Macedo says the state cannot afford this.
This bill was passed so long ago, we have members of the Assembly that were children when this idea was cooked up.
We've spent...
And there are plenty of people who are not opposed to the idea. What they're opposed to is that California can do it. And California has shown that they cannot. And the more money we spend on this without actual reform, the more we're throwing it down the toilet.
We've spent billions of dollars. We're going to have to spend billions of dollars more to have a small portion of this track that we already kind of know the ridership isn't going to be there either.
Unless you live in Fresno and are going to school at UC Merced, what exactly is the point here?
State officials say the High-Speed Rail Authority is now doing a broad overview of the project and is expected to update lawmakers at some point this summer. Reporting at the state capitol, Ashley Zavala, KCRA 3 News.
State Senator David Cortese leads the Senate's Transportation Committee. He told us he is working to set a hearing on the issue in May.
Good to know they're acting with urgency. So let me tell you about the sacrifices that I make for this audience. I could listen to a whole lot of things on my way home. I could listen to my Conan O'Brien podcast. I could listen to my Melrose Place podcast. I can listen to that new Chapel Roan song over and over and over again. But you know what I do? Just for you, I listen to Gavin Newsom's podcast. This is Gavin Newsom, which is one of the most narcissistic titles I've ever heard for a podcast. And this whole thing was making headlines originally because Gavin Newsom was going to interview all the big stars in the right-wing media sphere. So he had on Charlie Kirk, and then he had on Michael Savage, and then he had on Steve Bannon. Then he had on Tim Walz, and I'll be honest, the guest that he had on this week, I didn't even know who this guy was. That sounds like porno music, doesn't it?
This is Gavin Newsom. And this is Ezra Klein.
So Ezra Klein is a writer. I think he's done columns for the New York Times. He also thinks about policy, writes about policy, and he wrote this book called Abundance. And he's getting booked on tons and tons and tons of different shows because the book kind of outlines a lot of the failures and a lot of the reckoning that the Democratic Party is facing right now. But what I didn't know was that this book is very much about the failure of California to do things like high-speed rail, like the affordability crisis and the housing crisis. It is very much about the failures of people like Gavin Newsom and the California legislature. And as soon as I started listening, I realized, wow, this is a completely different podcast because the whole point of this was for Gavin to opine on national subjects. They get him on the national stage. And maybe he thought when he invited Ezra Klein that they would talk about national issues and they would talk about Trump and whatever the scandal of the week is. But no, they ended up talking about Gavin's housing policy and the failure to actually build what he says he's going to build. And of course, they talked a lot about high-speed rail. What I want to do over the next 2 days is we're going to split this up because it's way too much sound for one show. And they're two very different, very important topics. But today, we're going to start with Gavin Newsom having to defend himself and defend the high-speed rail in the face of the fact that it's the high-speed rail. Something he could easily throw under the bus because even though Gavin Newsom is in charge right now, This was passed under Schwarzenegger. Construction started under Brown. Yes, he was lieutenant governor, but that's not really a thing. But Gavin Newsom was the one when he took office in 2019 that said, you know what? We have to relook at this thing. We do not have the funding for LA to San Francisco. So we're going Bakersfield to Merced. And then we found out it was Wasco to Merced. And yes, I've been corrected by this audience. I'm well aware it is Wasco, not Wasco, although Wasco sounds so much more fun. But I want to play you some clips from this podcast because it was actually pretty enlightening to hear in a friendly source, because this guy is a Democrat writer. He talks about, he writes about liberalism and liberal policies, but he also talks about the failings of those and the fact that if California was really the place that you wanted to stand up to other states to show, hey, we're doing everything right, then why is everything such a mess here? We've got a Democrat supermajority in this state and nothing works. One party rule does not work. It doesn't work on the other side as well. If I lived in Alabama, I'd tell you how bad Alabama is, and Alabama's pretty damn bad. Let's go and listen to a little bit of the clips that I had to isolate from Gavin Newsom's podcast with Ezra Klein. And I got to tell you, just a little pet peeve that I have. Gavin Newsom is an elected official, and he's doing this podcast, although it's not like it's a government podcast. He's doing it through iHeartRadio, which is a little strange because that's like a commercial radio company, and they sell commercials. I don't think he's getting any revenue from this. I don't know exactly how that works. The other podcast he did with Marshawn, they were doing live reads. Gavin was doing a live read for some mental health thing, but is he getting paid a talent fee for that? I don't know. I also know, and this is very inside, but I just have to point it out, that during the COVID days, when Gavin was putting out so much money, including for PSAs, for all this nonsense during COVID, there were a lot of radio companies trying to get those dollars. And the radio company I work for didn't get any of those dollars. And iHeartRadio, which now does Gavin's podcast, got tons and tons and tons of government money to run those PSAs. Just something interesting to point out. Now, without further ado, oh yeah, what was I telling you? The thing that's irritating about this is Gavin Newsom, public official. The things he talks about in this show are going to be talked about in the public sphere. But he does a podcast. I am on a radio broadcast, so I have to, with a fine-tooth comb, search through the transcript of this thing to make sure I edit out any swear words. Now, to be fair, Gavin's not the one cursing in this, but I had to bleep out 3 S's and 2 F's. It's a little dirtier sometimes on the Marshawn podcast, but I don't think he's going back to that. I think he forgot that one existed. All right, here we go. Gavin Newsom gets told what's what when it comes to the high-speed rail by someone he will actually listen to.
But there is the fundamental disconnect, and you're absolutely right, as it relates to these large-scale, audacious projects. And I will give you your due on high-speed rail. I have been...
Oh, Gavin's the one that brings it. Well, Gavin read the book. High-speed rail is a whole chapter in this book. I'm actually kind of fascinated now.
As critical or more than you have about this. In fact, I appreciate...
Well, I don't know if Gavin has been more critical than anyone else on this subject because Gavin's the one keeping this thing alive. He got the Biden administration to pump more money into this thing.
You reference my pivot after I took this job as governor, where we called out the status quo. And now...
Yes, you said, okay, we don't have the money for San Francisco to L.A., so we're going to build in the Central Valley and only the Central Valley.
Called out the status quo. And now we're trying to level set and get this back on track. But at least there's a vision. At least Obama had a vision.
What does that mean? What does a vision matter if you don't accomplish it? You can have big, bold ideas, and that's wonderful. But if you don't do them, then people don't care and people don't trust you. Do you think if when JFK said we're going to put a man on the moon in 10 years, we didn't put a man on the moon, people would remember that JFK said we're going to put a man on the moon in 10 years? They'd remember it, but they'd remember it for ridicule. And by the way, that goes to show you, it took 10 years to put a man on the moon, and we can't build a train with technology from 1965.
He wanted to be big in big things. He wanted to do big things. And at least progressive states still have a vision.
Yeah.
And they have a desire. I mean, and I think that's part of an abundance frame.
You don't get credit for not accomplishing even what your goals are when you have no roadblocks and everybody in government agrees with you.
And while it's difficult to manifest that vision, I don't think it's an indictment necessarily. It's indictment in terms of our ability to deliver on time and under budget.
It's on your ability to deliver, period. You promised a train. We voted for a train. We paid for a train. There's no train. And this shows the failure of California to do things.
But the vision, I think, is foundational and important. And I'd give credit.
No, it's not.
To the Obama administration in that respect for all three, even if they were 0 for 3.
Look, I'm all for vision. My upset, the point of this book is that I want the things to happen. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about high-speed rail. We must talk about high-speed rail. But before we get there for a second, I mean, I do get the question around this book because it is very critical of how liberals have governed. Well, then why aren't you just a Republican, right? If Texas is so good at housing. And the thing that I keep telling people is you've really confused means and ends here. Another thing that keeps coming up is like, you want deregulation. Isn't that a Republican thing? Well, not if I'm deregulating the government itself so it can deliver on the things you want.
Right.
Well, we can't do that in California. We're all about the process, and the process is slow.
Right.
12 years to do the permitting for high-speed rail.
Right. What's supposed to matter in politics is not the means, it's the ends.
Right.
And Gavin Newsom's the complete opposite. Gavin Newsom will have a press conference every day and talk about how much money he has spent on a problem, will not tell you what the outcome is. And people are sick of that. They want to know, what did you spend the money on and how did it make my life better? Not just that you spent a bunch of money, because we have not seen an improvement. It's true with the rail, it's true with homelessness, and it's definitely true with this housing policy.
And what I sort of want, what I'm trying to push here is for liberals to get a little bit more means agnostic and more like ends obsessed.
There you go.
So the place where I probably differ a little bit in what you just said a second ago is that I don't want to give anybody credit for a vision that didn't happen.
You're damn right. I like this guy. I didn't know who he was before this, but I was very interested in hearing what he had to say, especially because this is the first time that Gavin's actually on his own podcast getting told about his failed California policies to his face, which we don't see a lot of because he doesn't do a lot of interviews with people who are really boned up on California policy.
High-speed rail you have a great quote to me in this. I use it in the book. High-speed rail has undermined the public's faith in what can get done. It undermines the next high-speed rail, right?
That's 100% right. Why would we vote on any big, giant bond trusting California to do anything when California couldn't do this when people voted for it? People said, yes, let's do it. I mean, do you know how long ago 2008 was?
And the thing that I want to see happen is a kind of reckoning inside the governing, I would call it a culture. It's not just laws. It's not just regulations, although it is all those things, but it is a culture of what happens when the Democrats who are setting this stuff up get in the room together and people start raising their hands and saying, what about this? And what about that? And how about the other thing? And instead of hear and no, everybody gets kind of a little bit. And it's not the only thing going on, but there is something wrong in a culture that so often fails to deliver what it promises. I mean, not just high-speed rail.
But high-speed rail is a huge example of that, especially with the California legislature, with Gavin Newsom, with the way things are done in this state, because the state moves incredibly slow at the things it says it wants to accomplish. Gavin Newsom will say over and over and over again that housing affordability is California's original sin. It's priority 1, 2, and 3. And every single thing he's done to help with that has not improved it. Homelessness, every single thing he's done, every single thing we've spent money on has not improved the problem. And high-speed rail is proof point, to use one of Gavin Newsom's terms, that California cannot be big in big things. We're just getting started here. You're going to hear more of Gavin Newsom getting told about high-speed rail's failures to his face on his own podcast. Stick around, everyone. Grab some popcorn. It's going to be one of those days. 800-222-KABC is the phone number. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. We're going through Gavin Newsom's most recent podcast where he talked with columnist Ezra Klein about Gavin Newsom's failed policies, including the high-speed rail. He gets told to his face on his own podcast what a failure this project is, and it is music to my ears. We get a lot more, and you're going to find out why the state of California decided to start this project in the Central Valley. Why, to begin with, did we decide to build this thing in the middle and then eventually extend it to the population centers? You're going to find out why, and it is fairly comical. 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. If you want to email us, you could do so at randykabc@gmail.com. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Your emails as well at randykabc@gmail.com, and search for the KABC News Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. We're going through Gavin Newsom's podcast with Ezra Klein, who is a writer and a columnist who wrote a book about California's failures. It's about the reckoning of the Democratic Party, but a lot of it is about California and Gavin Newsom's failures, including the failure to deliver on high-speed rail, which was supposed to be completed San Francisco to Los Angeles in 2020. We'll get back to the podcast and Gavin getting told to his face what a failure he is by somebody he admires. But first, let's go to Ray in Manhattan Beach. Ray, hello.
Hi. You know, they're just experts at wasting money. And, you know, one of the things that drives me insane is most people just get their insurance through their work. I'm an independent contractor, so I have to buy my own. And if you go to Covered California, you put in your age, and then you put in your income, you will see the price of your policy dramatically change. So if you put in $20,000, I earn $20,000 a year, you get basically free coverage. And it goes up to about $150,000, where you'll go from like $100 a month up to $500 a month for a policy because you make more money. So where is it in a free market society do you get charged more because you make more? And
that's called equity,
he's not
Ray.
You know, all these illegal
equity,
immigrants are getting free health care, and we're paying for it.
Exactly. No, you make a really good point. How exactly is that fair? And the priorities that have blown the budget. So that's going to be fun for him to deal with. Thanks so much for the call. Appreciate it. Let's go to Bill in La Cañada. Bill, hello.
Hey, Randy, good on you for mentioning Gavin's smelly relationship with that private media company and those PSA giveaways. Public figures getting financially measurable favors from private industry used to be considered conflict of interest, which is a crime. It's one small step away from Mark Ridley Thomas and his USC deal. They got him a prison sentence, and Jose Huizar and his developer buddies. And you may remember a guy named Randy Cunningham, a San Diego congressman about 20 years ago. He got buddy-buddy with military contractors and ended up with a prison sentence. And that's why I'm so on Karen Bass's case about her similar deal with USC. And you can also put Ricardo Lara in there getting wined and dined by private industry. You know, that stuff used not to be tolerated by the media. And, you know, I got to remind you that I used to write about that stuff myself, and nobody seems to care anymore, and it really stinks.
Oh, yeah. And one of the things that has happened is Gavin Newsom has danced on the line of what exactly of all that is legal. For instance, him bailing out PG&E and getting wined and dined at the French Laundry by PG&E's lobbyist, his closest friend. Thanks so much for the call, Bill. Appreciate it. 800-222-KABC is the phone number. Let's listen a little more of Gavin get told what's what on high-speed rail on his own podcast.
So high-speed rail. So when I went out and did the reporting on that, and I went up and down the track with the people building it, and the people from the rail authority, and they told me a couple things that have stuck in my head that I don't try to resolve in the book, but I'd be curious for your thoughts. So one was that the Merced-Bakersfield leg, which is the leg that is currently being tried, I think they said they had something like line of sight either had spent or had line of sight on something like, it was in the range of $11 to $15 billion.
We've $13.4 billion, of which 10.8 from the state and 2.6 from the feds.
All right.
And it was announced today that they're $7 billion short on that.
And that the estimate on finishing Merced to Bakersfield was $36 billion.
Yeah, well, there's currently our estimates, and this plus or minus, and this is a moving target, about $6.5 billion that we...
Boy, he's getting gravelly.
Based upon what...
You know, it's funny. He doesn't smoke, but sure does sound like someone who smokes.
About $6.5 billion that we, based upon what we have, the current commitments, we had additional $3 billion from the federal government. Obviously, the Biden Trump administration is trying to vandalize that as they did the last time.
Well, they're trying to investigate if it's being spent properly, because so far we have no train.
And then cap and trade proceeds that will continue to accrue.
Oh, that's fun. I didn't know that. So cap and trade, which is one of the reasons that the cost of gasoline is so expensive in the state, that money goes to a whole bunch of nonsense where you were told it's supposed to be these carbon offsets and we're going to buy a bunch of trees. Well, what do we know cap and trade money is being used for? Apparently, some of it's going to the high-speed rail, which, again, hasn't taken any cars off the road because it's nowhere near being finished, and it won't take any cars off the road going from Fresno and Bakersfield to Merced. And we know that they wanted to do that rebate program for e-bikes, which also won't take any cars off the road. But, of course, we're about to extend cap and trade because that program's working out great.
If we extend cap and trade, can you bond against that? There's a lot of variations.
So you're saying you think you have line of sight on the money with a delta of $6.5 billion?
Roughly, yeah.
Okay.
Which is funny because the legislative analyst's office said, no, you don't.
And what a bunch of the people working on it said is like, look, in the end, for this to really work, it needs to be LA to San Francisco. And that would cost $110 billion.
Yeah, well, we're looking at it. And I don't, look, here I am.
How many times does he say, look, Gavin is being caught flat-footed right now? Because this is the reality. The only reason this train made any sense, they have no idea how to actually do that.
Here I am. We extended high-speed rail. The idea is to get it in these density and population corridors, which is the point you make in the critique, and get to Fresno, for example, to Gilroy, where Caltran is, and we can then connect to San Jose and into San Francisco. You have the existing infrastructure in place. That's about an hour. You get into Palmdale. Now you're connecting with the new Bright Line.
But there's no plan for any of this and no funding for any of this. And the Bright Line's not in Palmdale. It's in Victorville, and those aren't even close to each other.
That's going all the way to Vegas, and one of the fastest growing parts of the state in Palmdale, where middle-class families can still afford a home. And so those are component parts. And that's where I think that $36 billion number came from. Those three component parts roughly add up to that. Now, the Tehachapi Mountains, getting them over, all of those larger issues, those are issues that obviously are component parts of this larger.
And something that they've had 17 years to think about. Actually, no, longer than that, because even though this was voted on in 2008, there's been discussion. The High-Speed Rail Authority, I believe, was created in the 90s. They've been talking about this for almost as long as I've been alive, and we got nothing to show for it. Let's go to Patrick in Hacienda Heights. Patrick, hello.
Hey, Randy. How's it going today?
Doing great.
You know, it's our governor, and you said it earlier, he likes to talk about how much money he spends. It seems like the more money he does spend or calls for, the less results we get. I think he's trying to break the state. I mean, there's just no other way to think about it. And once it gets to the point where all the people that get all the free stuff from him aren't getting their free stuff anymore, there's going to be some radical change. And maybe the state will get run correctly. But for now, we've got a profligate spender. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and once you run out of money to give to all the special interests that are keeping you afloat, they're going to turn on him real quick, and we're going to see quite the reckoning. You're totally right, Patrick. Thanks for the call. 800-222-KABC is the phone number. More with Gavin Newsom on his own podcast about high-speed rail, and you're going to find out why we started this thing in Fresno. You're going to find out, and it's pretty darn hilarious. 800-222-KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang, and we're taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC. And we're taking your emails at randykabc@gmail.com. Roger writes in and says, California just should have invested a few billion in a regular rail line between LA and Bakersfield, extend the San Joaquin Valley service from Bakersfield and Sacramento, Emeryville, San Jose to Los Angeles, maybe get the Burlington, Northern Santa Fe, and Union Pacific to chip in funds and run a few priority freights, save hundreds of billions over decades. Well, it's funny you say that, Roger, because there's a very specific reason we didn't do that. And there's a very, very specific reason why they didn't just build this thing along the 5 freeway where they already own the land. And we're going to get to it next. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang. Let's get back to Gavin Newsom getting told what's what by Ezra Klein on his own podcast.
Oh, but I think the big question people have about it, and you hear people asking this all the time, is that,
and I inherited this.
Yes, you inherited this. This is not your fault.
This was not my.
Okay, Gavin, I know you're new at broadcasting, although he used to have a radio show and he was a supervisor and the mayor of San Francisco. But don't talk over people. It's so annoying. Just be quiet.
My baby from 2008
I'm not blaming Governor Newsom on this
God
one.
bless. I'm just trying to get it back on track. But I think the question
is, if there is not a line of sight on that 36 to 110 billion, right? That doesn't exist. And that's a very hard thing.
Well, you try to get revenue generation. Once you start getting the large population corridors, if you could connect Silicon Valley to Central Valley, which is the foundational argument.
But it doesn't, and it won't. You're connecting the Central Valley to the Central Valley. So what revenue and what ridership is there going to be?
And you can start sharing.
People in Merced don't need to move to Fresno for a lower cost of living.
And you can start sharing. We're looking at train sets that have interoperability, not just with Brightline, but high desert corridors. You have 2 private sector partners, and we're actually procuring train sets very, very shortly. As I say, we did the railhead. We're starting to lay track. This thing's starting to get very, very real.
No, it's not.
Some of the projects you did see are projects that will have profound impacts economically in terms of the upzoning, particularly in the Fresno corridor.
Here we go. It's about all the money we spent and how we built a whole bunch of housing next to all these rail stations that don't exist yet.
And Fresno is a very important
I think
part of the state.
The big worry I heard from transportation types is that the ridership in those corridors, as fast growing as they may be, is not enough to throw off money. It's not even enough to handle that operating budget, very likely. And it's definitely not,
this thing's going to lose money every year.
And it's definitely not going to throw off money that's going to complete a $110 billion train. And that we're finishing something that in the end is going to be a monument to not being able to build the thing we wanted.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to build a new airport. We're not, the end of the day, we've got these constraints that are well established already, these pre-existing constraints. There's not a high-speed rail in the system that's not enjoying some popularity and success. Most, at least, are wildly popular.
Well, they operate and they go somewhere. Japan, Europe, they've had these for years and years and years, decades.
It's an experience no one's had in the United States of America. At least we're out there daring.
No, you don't get credit for wanting to build a high-speed rail. You get credit for actually building one and building it on time and on budget, which we did not do. All right, I've been teasing this all hour. Let's get to it. Why exactly was it such a great idea to start this thing in the middle of the state? Why wouldn't you start connecting part of the Central Valley to the Bay Area or part of the Central Valley to the Los Angeles area and then connect your entire San Francisco to Los Angeles? What was the reason?
I mean, I love to intellectualize all these things. What coulda, shoulda, woulda, but there's certain foundational facts. And interestingly, you made the point in the book that I have to over and over make to people. Why did we start in the Central Valley? It was a requirement, federal requirement for federal dollars. Now, it's not the worst idea.
The feds at the time, which was the Barack Obama administration, said that they needed to start this thing in the Central Valley. But why? Why would they even know or care? What exactly was the reason? Oh, just wait.
I mean, the Intercontinental Railroad.
Just to say it was a requirement because the federal program wasn't just for high-speed rail. It was to start where you had air pollution for marginalized communities.
Yeah.
Which is both like, I just want to say this because it's part of why I'm saying this in the book, is that all sounds great. And you can come up with reasons to start in Central Valley, but it's the part of the state that will generate the least political capital to keep going.
The reason we started this thing in Fresno And the reason we started it in the center to the center, which doesn't really do anything, was the only way to get the matching federal funds, $3 billion from the Obama administration, was that money wasn't just for high-speed rail, but we wanted to improve asthma problems for people in marginalized communities. So they looked at who has the worst air quality in the state, and apparently at the time it was Fresno, and that's why we decided to build that there instead of along the 5 freeway. That's why we started it there, and it doesn't make any sense. But this is what's wrong with so many projects, where it doesn't matter if it makes sense. If there's federal dollars, we got to do it. If there, the locals do this too. The state hands out money for those needle exchange programs. I don't even want it, but I want the money. Got to have the money. We're so addicted to the matching funds and the money because the more we spend, the more people we make happy and the more people vote for us. It was the Obamas that said, you got to build this thing in the Central Valley for equity and health outcomes, except how exactly has this helped health outcomes? Because in 17 years, there's been no train.
Yeah, because it has the least dense ridership.
Right.
But
it's also part of the state that does have. I mean, you talk about ignorance, poverty, and disease. You talk about the issues of air quality and life expectancy. You talk about
but they have no train.
Economic opportunity.
And the train doesn't go anywhere.
The economic opportunities.
Yeah, but
and
what
limits.
addresses air quality is the whole track.
Well, ultimately, a fully electrified track.
Yes.
I mean, that
every single argument Gavin has gets deflated by somebody Gavin really likes.
Well,
this is just, to me, it's an example. Yeah. This one wasn't California's fault. This was the Obama administration. But
California could have just tried to do this on their own. But no, we needed that matching federal money. Got to make a whole lot of people fat and happy.
It's an example of they should have given, I want to say what I think should have happened here. They should have given you whatever $3-some billion, right? That's what that grant was. And just said, use it for high-speed rail, right? It shouldn't have been a stacked series of ideas, right? It doesn't all need to be a triple axle. Right. Yeah. High-speed rail is hard enough, as you know better than I do.
No, and it wasn't just about high-speed rail. It was about health outcomes and equity.
It's, representative democracy is a tough thing. Dictatorships are a little easy. But
that wasn't representative democracy. Nobody knew that.
No, a lot of folks in the Central Valley, a lot of the elected officials, a lot of the Blue Dog Democrats, a lot of the Democratic...
Oh, yes. The assembly members from the Central Valley held all the power.
It's a lot of
But the Obama administration, when they created those programs, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot happening. I really, this is an important point to me.
But there were a lot of representatives, Democratic representatives, that stipulated their support for that bill and those dollars that it go to the Central Valley.
There is a lot of politics in that. I don't want.
Yeah. And so we decided to do something that did not make any sense. And we didn't have enough forward thinking or critical thinking to realize, okay, we're building something that we don't have any of the land rights to, and it's going to take decades for us to get all of that, let alone all the permitting and everything else. And once we finally have something built, it's not going to do any good for anybody. And how much exactly are they going to have to cost? How much do they have to charge for a ticket to make their money back on this? I don't know. Thank you all so much for listening. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC.